Okay, I think we'll get started here tonight. Call the meeting to order. Could we have a roll call, please?
Elson. Nystrom.
Here.
Teben.
Here.
Pritchard.
You say my name?
He's here.
Just log in here. Sorry.
Elson. Here. Pritchard. Or sorry, Melhouse.
Here. Okay, I'm gonna call this meeting to order. First, a little quick. On behalf of the board, I'd like to express our sympathies to two families who lost long-term teachers in our district within the past week. Mrs. Karen Hesser and Mrs. Daleen O'Brien both passed away after long battles with cancer. Both were very loved and revered teachers in our district, in both of the music, one in the music department, the other one in the English department. So again, board's condolences to the families. Now, we're going to move ahead, and we've kind of changed the agenda up a little bit tonight because we're kind of running into a little bit of a first crunch time for the thought of trying to put a new bond issue through for our school district for a new elementary school, with election being in early March, on the one day in March that we can have an election. Last week, last Friday, Jeremy, Richard, and I had meetings with Julie and Mitch, and then we had a representative gentleman come talk to us about using a construction manager theme for construction. In the past, we've always just gone with the architect, but there are some advantages to both, and I think we'll go into that later on tonight. And then we also met with DLR to discuss some of the preliminaries of what our goals would be for this building. And so I believe we have Eric and Andrew from DLR on, and I'm going to let them give a little presentation that they were putting together. We asked them to put together Friday, so sorry guys, we were up until 2 o'clock this morning working on this, or 3 a.m. But looking forward to what you have to provide us.
Oh, sure. Hello, everybody. Thanks for having us at the meeting this evening. I'm going to share my screen here with you guys. And I think, are you all able to see that?
Yes.
Very
Yes.
good, very good. So yes, Mr. Melhouse described kind of where we've been at within the process here over the last few days, and we did meet with administration last week, and you know, you guys are in the middle of some property transition, and so what we wanted to do is assist you in putting together a plan for how to achieve your bond referendum, you know, next spring. And so what we've done here is, you know, there's a lot of moving parts to when you design a facility. We've been very fortunate to work with you guys over the last decade or more. And so this is just kind of a very quick snapshot of some of the work that goes in behind the scenes and how we get to a point in time. So what I'm going to do here is kind of illustrate to you. I won't go through every word, every page, but in essence, in order to possibly set a bond referendum amount, you kind of have to have an idea of what it is that you're constructing, or where you're going. And so what we have done is we put together some information. This here is an executive summary, really just kind of talking about the strides that your district has made in facility improvement over the last 15 years, and the commitment that you've made to fulfilling that mission. So again, I'll let you read some of that on your own. But as we've been talking and shared previously with the board earlier this year, you are looking at some property to the east, on the east side of the city of Boone, along Corporal Snedden Drive. And some of the work that's been done to date really has just been kind of test fit type models. And this diagram here kind of illustrates that. This is a diagram that you have seen specifically, I think, earlier this spring, and then summer. We did make a presentation to the council just to kind of get them accustomed to seeing and talking about your project. So this area here is the 60 acres that you're considering, and only shows a development, initial development of about 20 acres. The math hasn't been finalized yet for a new early childhood center. And so what we did to help you through this planning was initially just provided a similar sized building. You can see here, there's no details about rooms or doors or anything of that nature, but just to illustrate to you how that could happen on the site, and to prove out basically that the amount of acreage that you're looking at would in fact work for the type of program that you're putting together. Last week and over the weekend, what Andrew and I did was we put together a conceptual space program to help identify and start to allocate sizing and costs to what this bond may in fact be. And some of the criteria that we used is grade configuration of a pre-kindergarten, kindergarten, and first grade. That would also include some form of daycare, wraparound daycare program. Initially planning for an enrollment of about 400 students plus staff, and then allowing your building to grow in the future for maybe 600 students plus staff. And at one time, there was a goal with that daycare program to be viable. You're looking about having 75 students available for that in order to make the finances pan out. And so again, there will be much more planning that's involved here later on, but this again is an initial concept to help you and help the district start to allocate some costs. And so what this does here, this indicates kind of the program. The intent would be the Lincoln and Page facilities would be retired, and then still holding on to your Franklin elementary, middle school, and high school, along with this new early childhood center. So the meat of this, and I'm going to go through this just in a brief synopsis. Again, I won't go through every square foot of the building, but we have an in-depth kind of programming process. We call it a space program. We actually like to say it's not something that NASA developed, but this is the space that you occupy, that students and staff will be in on a daily basis, doing their thing. And this is a synopsis for us. It indicates your student population of about 420 students, the numbers of grades served, and then some calculations of gross square footage. All of that is derived from these detailed pages here, where we take a deep dive into each space within the facility, from administration to art to classrooms, kindergarten, etc. And we begin to allocate the numbers of spaces, the square footage assigned to each one of those. And at the top here, you have a proposed column, which would be basically current day. That's how we get to the 400 students. And then the future column, and that would illustrate that how in the future we can get to the 600 students. And that kicks out a total here for us. There's a lot of math and other parameters that are involved behind the scenes here, but this is kind of the summary worksheets for you. And again, this has not been vetted out completely. We still have a lot of work to do with you and your team, but it does again set the foundation for setting a direction for your district and how you get from point A to point B. And at the end of the day, at the end of this summary here, what this does is All of these units here are in net assignable area, which is the net square footage. It's basically interior wall to interior wall. But we know that buildings are made up of circulation and electrical rooms and restrooms and structure, the thickness of walls. And so when we apply some of those grossing factors, you can see down here, this gives you a net or a gross square footage of about 79,800 square feet on the initial program. And then in the secondary, looking for future growth, we would be adding about 24,000, and that would give you a total facility of 103. We don't do this in a vacuum. We do, if I can back up here just for a moment, you'll remember on this page here, we talk about square footage per student. So we've recently completed a few early childhood centers for other districts around the state, namely Storm Lake, Iowa, and also Urbandale. And what our benchmark for how these numbers compare is this square footage per student. And so I'm pleased to say that you fall within the parameters of those other districts of where you're headed for that square footage per student. And that number will get more efficient as you add more program to the building, because one of the things that we're doing is as we build a facility that has expansion capability, things like like food service, your cafeteria, your art spaces, those are sized appropriately for the full build out. But those are things that are also needed on day one. And so those numbers sometimes skew your initial square footage per student in a higher direction until the full build out is realized. Because what we don't want to do is undersize some of your core spaces, the gymnasium, the cafeteria on day one, and then have to go back and add on to that in a later date. So all of this again is just done here kind of as the homework to show you and illustrate to you how we kind of interpolate the information and get you to a proposed number. So the next document I'm going to illustrate here is a proposed project expense. And so what this does is this takes into account some of the factors that we know about the site. It takes into account all the information that we just illustrated to you in a space program. And so again, this is a conceptual budget here, just to kind of illustrate where we're headed. This is by no means a final budget. There are still things that can tweak within this budget here, but what we've tried to be is conservative to account for situations or unknowns where we may not know some detailed information right now. And so within this budget, it's broken down into several categories. Site acquisition, we understand to be a separate funding source at this time. Off-site development is anything that may be beyond your property line. So if there's roadways or sewers or electrical items, utilities that may need to be done, those would fall into an off-site development. And knowing that the school is acting as a developer, moving to a new tract of land, there may be some expenses that need to be allocated there. As we already talked about, Page and Lincoln, there may be some repurposing or things that happen with that. So those are yet to be determined at this point. But then looking at your new elementary construction cost, looking at about an $18.5 million value there. And you see here, again, I just rounded off about 80,000 square feet on 20 acres of development. This does include a storm shelter, which is, I know, been a topic of discussion around the state in different municipalities, and is also now being required in the code. So those are things that we want to plan for and take advantage of. And then also in relation to the watershed improvements. So again, the property that you're looking at, does have some unique water qualities to it, and we want to make sure that those are preserved now and in the future. The professional fees section is basically your design and engineering fees. professional fees. Others is again additional design and engineering fees for things like food service and geotechnical investigations, surveys, all the things that are required to get your project put together and out the door. Miscellaneous fees, distribution costs for getting it out to bidders, utility rebates, anticipating what those may be for your size facility for energy efficiency. And then we always hold a construction contingency at the bottom there, again, because of potential unknowns that may happen during construction. And then finally at the bottom, we want you to be able to furnish this facility. So providing furniture, window treatments, interior signage, holding dollars for that, and then any playground equipment that may come along. And so what that does is that projects here a total project expense of about 22.8. And again, there may be bid alternates, or there may be other selections that are made during the design process. One thing to realize is that a design process for a facility of this nature usually takes anywhere from 9 to 12 months of time, and so we are prepared to assist you in that going forward, dependent on the success of your bond referendum. The appendix information here is really just background information for you, for the board and the district, illustrating the facilities that you have in town and their relationship to one another. And one of the things that was very key in the proposal for this early childhood center was location. Location. Being with the daycare component, a wraparound daycare, and early childhood, knowing how your community travels to and from work, that's critical, and that's why the site was chosen on the eastern side of the city to facilitate those parents that may be traveling to and from their place of business. Just some background information. So this is always kind of interesting. You may or may not be aware of some of the parameters or the characteristics of your existing buildings. But the Lincoln Elementary, which is one of the facilities that this new facility would encapsulate basically from a grade level, is looking at the total numbers of acres and square footage that is being assigned there. And you can see, on that site only being 2 3/4 acres compared to what your middle school sits on, even what Franklin Elementary sits on, or the high school property. That's a pretty tight site, especially when you're looking at combining the numbers of students. So you can see here just an aerial map of that, and just a floor plan, just again illustrate some of the existing characteristics. Again, looking at Page Elementary, some similar characteristics. There's a very tight site within the city, and just some of the floor plan characteristics of that. And again, understanding that you're going to be combining your facilities together. So that is the end of the packet that we prepared for you this evening to help you through your bond discussion. And I'd love to answer any questions that you might have as you go forward.
Okay, Eric. First thing, can we go back to the graph that shows the school district and where the buildings are?
You bet.
That has the wrong property line there. The Boone Airport is technically not in the Boone School District.
Sure.
What you see is County Road R27.
Yep.
That line is the Boone School District line there.
Gotcha. Yes, I think this was technically the city limits.
It might be the city limits, but
city limits.
our school district line is comes over, so we need to probably adjust that.
Sure.
Over for the school district.
Okay.
Hey, Eric, it's Jeremy. Could you show a picture of the Storm Lake facility that you guys designed so that the board members and the administrators can see kind of the level of quality that you're proposing and how you base your construction costs?
Sure. Andrew, is that something you have pulled up, or would you like me to?
Yep, I'm gonna get it right here.
Okay. I'm going to stop sharing here, and Andrew's going to pull up some of those imageries here.
bear with me. All right. Can you guys see my screen all right?
Yes.
Okay. So just as Jeremy requested, these are just some of the conceptual images of the new early, they're calling theirs an early elementary school in Storm Lake. This project recently bid earlier this spring and is under construction right now. They're getting as much done as they can before snow really sets in and winter hits. But very similar in characteristics on their site plan. They had a new site they were working with as well, a phased approach to their building. So they are much like you are, kind of building the infrastructure to begin with, and then being able to grow and add on. So just the floor plan here that shows they're about 300 students, just over 300 students on day one, whereas this building we're looking at is about 400 for the boom. And then you can see from some of these imagery here, they're using a mixture of brick, metal panel, windows, landscaping up front, but just a few other images that show the exterior content. And then interior wise, use of bright colors for wayfinding, a sense of creativity and exploration throughout the facility, and really trying to create a cohesive, comprehensive environment for the students. So are there other images you'd like to see or anything else on Storm Lake? Is that helpful, Jeremy?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Andrew.
Good.
What was the square foot size of that school?
That school is about 68,500 square feet. And again, that was for just over 300 students in phase one. They will be looking at future phases here on the site and here on the site. So with your facility, knowing to make sure you're not kind of painted into a corner, and make sure the site has the infrastructure to grow as well as the amenities to grow in future. So site access for fire truck, obviously coming around future additions, making sure any new utilities were not going to be compromised or undermined when they added on to this to their facility. But
Thank you.
yep.
Eric, when we met earlier, we were talking about a 75,000 square foot. What add that other extra 5,000 square foot?
Sure. Let's go back to see if I can share my
And some of
screen.
the, I think some of the changes, just a few more special education classrooms. If we were to compare directly to Storm Lake, there was some additional there, and then going from 300 students to 400 students, that was one of the increases as well.
Oh, I meant from we last Friday we were talking about 75,000 square foot, and now we're up to 80,000 square feet.
Yeah, that at that time we had not done the detailed
all-
program as we have
Okay.
here.
Okay.
And so what you're seeing here, and I don't know if you're able to see this or not, but we've assigned six sections basically per per grade. So early childhood, 6 classrooms here for kindergarten, 6 for the first grade. And so again, and then in the future, 4, and that's assuming that there'd be about 25 students per classroom there, and that's how you get that that 100 in the secondary model. So.
Okay.
But this again here can be needs to be vetted, with you and your administration to fully comprehend what each of these spaces is, and again looking at some of the core spaces. So those are the things that we were talking about on Friday, is the core spaces really drive the initial program of the building for the future. So that may be also a little bit of where where some of the if we were talking in the ballpark 75 last week, final vetting some of those pieces and components, whether it be through classrooms or then gymnasium, cafeteria, some of those types of spaces, in the future. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Other questions from board members? Can we go back to their original screen so I can see the other board members?
Oh, sure.
Thank you.
There you go. Yep.
Pat, Pam, any questions?
Fine for now.
Okay.
You're going to send that out so that we can all review it closer, because I couldn't see. I mean, it was.
It's on board docs.
Thank you.
Okay. And just a little history here. I want to go back to starting the history. About 15, 18 years ago, a group of city leaders who met a couple nights in a local law office trying to decide what the future of the Boone Education buildings were. At that time, we had middle school, high school combined in one building. As part of that building was over 90 years old, and we had multiple neighborhood schools, and they were all older and deteriorating. At that time, this group got together and we established our priorities. We felt that separating the high school from the middle school was going to be the number one priority because there were too many kids in the older building. We elected to run for a middle school bond issue first because we did not have enough bonding capacity at the time, nor do we now, to build an entirely new high school because of the cost of the additional, such as the gymnasium, the auditoriums, pools, wrestling rooms, etc. So that's why I was run the middle school first. Then we felt that the high school's older buildings were probably in more dire shape than the elementary situation. Also, we were able to amend the elementary by expanding at Franklin and also adding 5th and 6th grade at the middle school. Such that high school became second, and the elementary schools, recognizing there were problems, we felt time that had to be the third priority. Well, now, 15 years later, probably a couple years ahead of what those of us in that room thought, well, we're ready to build the elementary school and make this the last cog in our building process for the last 15, 18 years. I'm happy that this is getting to fruition. We just got to get this phase through at a cost that will be reasonable for our citizens to approve the bond issue and then get the building process going. Any other comments from any board members right now on this phase?
I think it's important to note that even though the estimated cost was, I don't know, $22 million, we have different funds for different items in there, like playground equipment or furnishings or professional services. Just because it shows a cost of $22 million doesn't mean we're going to vote on GO bonds for $22 million. There's a lot of flexibility in how we can pay for certain aspects of that. The construction costs obviously would be an easy one for GO bonds, but for anybody watching that's listening out there, it does not necessarily mean we're going to run a bond campaign on the full amount, because the financial position we're in the district right now gives us a lot of flexibility on several of those line items in that budget proposal. Just something to keep in mind as we move forward.
Yes, Jeremy, thank you very much for that statement. Indeed, we do have some money in different accounts that we can use for this type of thing, which we cannot use for teacher salary. For those of you who are familiar with educational funding, you'll know that there are many silos or buckets of money, and what you can pay for out of one bucket or silo is very specific. And teacher salaries and some building upkeep is the general fund, but then building new buildings and major repairs are different funds that we pay for that out of. So there's about 4 or 5 other funds that we can use, and we don't use general funds for this building. On the other hand, we can only use general funds to pay the teachers. So that's always a perennial problem every time you run a bond issue. And right now, the school is sitting pretty good. We're hoping, pretty confident yet seeing these numbers tonight, that we should be able to offer a bond issue with no tax increase. That's our goal, to be able to figure that out. And so Mr. Lewis and the officials at Piper Sandra, I think it is now, who are our financial planning experts. They do it for a lot of the school districts in the state of Iowa. They're in the process of working with us on this. If you look through the minutes at the last board meeting, you'll discover that they made a presentation on the topic of the school finances and sources of money that we have. And anything else from board members like to discuss about this topic?
I have a question in regards to the size, I guess. I see we have it slated, and correct me if I'm wrong, it was 190 square foot a student. I see the Storm Lake one was 228 square foot a student. Is there a size requirement by the state that we were looking at?
There's not a size requirement per se. When you get into some of the individual classrooms, if you're going to go for like a NACE accreditation, they minimum 35 square feet per student in a classroom. But when you look at an overall building facility, there's really only rules of thumb. There's not really any type of requirement. And Storm Lakes, well, it's at you said 228 or 223. Well, that's higher now. Once they add those classroom wings in the future, that'll bring that average down. But when you build a phase building, your initial square foot per student is generally higher because you've built the infrastructure for the kitchen, commons, gymnasium spaces to support the final build out, because those spaces are very challenging or cost prohibitive to expand at a later date. But where you're at right now, when we benchmark that with when you add some future classrooms to get up to a larger student population at the facility, it fits right in line with the kind of averages that we see on these types of facilities.
I believe they were planning on expanding that up to like 900, and we're expanding to 600.
Correct.
There's another difference. So therefore their initial cost for their initial square footage is going to be a little bit higher.
Just asking the question based on the changes that took place this year with COVID, if we're going to plan for future opportunities of having that space. So
understand. Thank you very much. Okay, any other questions? If not, I'd like to thank Matt and Eric Eric and Andrew for jumping on the call with us tonight to provide us information. I'm sure we'll be talking again as far as trying to crunch together some numbers. We are going to be having a bond committee. The school board itself, we cannot call for a bond. We have to have citizens do that. We can talk to a few people and get them to provide the leadership and work on this committee. But then they have to take it over and give the signatures, which will be about 500 signatures on a petition to have a bond right now. We'll need that. I have to have those 500 signatures in the board president's hand by, I believe it is December 1st. And then we have to make a motion in our December meeting to ask for a vote on this for March. And then we take that to the county auditor's office, and they arrange for the election. We are currently working with a few key people in town to help lead this drive, and I think that will probably become public knowledge, and we'll be able to officially report that out. I'm hoping later this week. And if anyone is listening is interested on being on that bond committee, I would encourage them to contact Mitch Lewis or Mrs. Tripa or Mr. Pritchard or myself about that committee. We can get you more details. Since the board cannot officially participate, and board's activities have kind of been broken down somewhat. Mr. Pritchard and I are on the building committee, grounds and maintenance in general for our school board. We're the two that look over those two things. The other board members have different assignments, but we do keep in contact with them with information. Anything major has to go through the entire board. And we'll be talking about this again at our meeting in November. So with that said, we're going to move on to the next topic.
Thank you all for having us this evening.
Thank you.
And the next topic is standards-based grading. I believe that is Mr. Tripa and Mr. Byam, if I remember right.
Yes. Yes, we're actually going to let Mr. Byam kind of walk you through some pieces that the high school's been working on, and we're focusing mainly on high school at this point because that is kind of where the efforts have been made this fall, and we'll continue to report out the rest of this year also as we progress through the standards reference grading as a district. But I'm going to go ahead and let Mr. Byam take this now.
Okay.
There we go. Thank you. Just wanted to talk a little bit about kind of the implementation of the standard reference grading over the last few years and kind of what we did. First, I wanted to have Dr. Janes kind of talk about a little bit of how we plan to map this out with the PLCs and standard reference grading as a district, and then I'll talk a little bit about how we implement it as a professional development throughout the high school.
Okay. So what you have in the first 2 lines of our chart is really an implementation plan for standards-based learning that district leaders mapped out really during the spring of 2018, fall of 2018, to think about how standards-based learning fit into the work we were doing in our district for just overall school improvement and to become a true professional learning community. And so we kind of laid out the work we had already done to set the stage with our professional learning communities in 2017 and 2018, and then really thought about what intentional steps did we need to take to support our staff in becoming a professional learning community. And a lot of that work focuses on really being clear in what we want all kids to learn, what's essential. And that aligns right with that standards-based learning and grading foundation of really being clear and what all kids need to master and what mastery looks like. And so we kind of married the two together in our timeline to say, you know, where are we now and where do we want to be in a kind of an implementation timeline. You'll see that on the standards-based learning timeline, the 2019-2020 year, there are some things that we didn't get completed. So we've highlighted them in yellow to just show that those are items that are still in the works and that we know we need to continue to do for successful implementation. But they're just things that, you know, you make a plan, you lay out a timeline, and sometimes things don't always go as planned. So our work really in every building has involved unpacking standards and really being clear on what we want all kids to learn. And then and each building and each team is at a little bit different place in implementation, but the overall goal is moving every team in BCSD and all of our buildings to a standards-based learning and grading approach. And the high school team is really doing some shifting right now in their implementation of standards-based grading, and that's why we focused on them tonight. So I guess we share the first 2 lines that I think that we've shared with the board before to show that this is part of larger school improvement work that we're doing. It's not necessarily a new thing for this school year, even if it feels new, there's just some new pieces being implemented. So I'll turn it back to Chris to talk about the specifics that BHS has put in place over the last several years to support teachers in preparing for standards reference grading and kind of where they are and what they have put in place this particular school year.
So in the year 2017, 2018, we started with a book study of the 15 fixes for broken grades on the recommendation from the AEA. We did a lot of different professional development revolving around that, broke it down, really got a feel for where our staff was when it came to grading practices. Actually surveyed our staff that year to rank all of our fixes from the most and least feasible of those 15 fixes, and got an idea of some of the pieces that we could actually implement in small phases throughout the next few years. Then starting in the 2018-2019 school year, we mapped out how our PLC work that we had been doing over many years, how that tied to our MTSS processes, how that tied into our grading practices, how that tied into our win time, and how we could piece that all together as we continued our progression towards standard reference grading. That same year, the district also brought in Dr. Anthony Mohammed and Eric Todell and did some presentations on PLCs and also into grading practices. So we were able to tie that. Later on that year, that school year, we did a differentiated book study based on 3 different books, kind of as where teachers were. We really wanted to find out some of their concerns or some of their passions and really kind of put them in an area that would help facilitate their learning and standard reference grading. So the 3 books that we had, Teacher's Guide to Standard-Based Grading, they had some knowledge based on standard reference grading and they still wanted to learn some more. We had some School Leaders Guide to Standard Reference Grading. So teachers that were already kind of piloting it had a really big passion and were helping to help lead the transition. And the Grading Cleanse, kind of looking at a little bit more in depth as to grading practices in general. At the same time, the district administration started looking at the Leader's Guide to Standard Reference Grading and was able to start honing in on how that transition could happen within the PLCs. And then we continued to put proficiency scales and assessments and things like that into play with professional development all of second semester working on that. That brings us into last year where we started working on the framework. The AEA supplies a really great product or framework that's already mapped out as to how to transition the pieces that we need to be looking at. And so we were able to map that out and what it would look like and then backfill our professional development that way. So we did a lot with proficiency skills last year, how that would affect learning those standards, making sure that all of our students are proficient in standards. And then we were able to refine those proficiency skills, and we did some instructional walkthroughs as an administrative team and instructional leaders, just to make sure that those were being implemented within the classrooms. And so we could get a depth of knowledge of where our teachers were at the time, and then make sure that we were supporting them to get an idea of where they were. Obviously, we continued the work in summative and formative assessments and what those pieces are. And then obviously COVID hit, and that kind of all threw us for a loop, as is anyway. But we know that piece with standard reference grading was really able to help us because we had all those essential standards mapped out. So the transition was a little bit easier in our online portions because we had established the essential standards early on with proficiency skills that were able to help implement our students in that transition. So same concept applies coming into this year, where we have that foundation set. We knew that we were going to be doing online pieces, and so establishing those essential standards and the proficiency skills to go with them was extremely important. So what we've done this year, you'll notice I put links on there. I'm not going to go through each link, but you'll notice the breakdown of our professional development this year and what our focuses have been. Right at the beginning of the year, we focused in on SRG, what it looked like, the proficiency scale reminders, what that could look like in Infinite Campus, things like that. We also backfilled our new staff with the information that we had prior to make sure that they were gaining the knowledge that they would need to be successful as we transitioned in this year. Then coming into September, we started sending weekly SRG updates to parents. And you'll notice that the next few pages beyond this, I emailed all of you this information so you have this presentation. The next, I believe it's 5 slides, basically are the parent guidelines. It's a fact sheet that we've been sending out to all the parents. So you have that in this presentation. We did a full professional development on the 16th and standard reference grading, finalized what standard reference grading translates to GPA so that we make sure that we're having that transition appropriately in Infinite Campus for our students. We've continued the weekly SRG updates, continuing to focus in on, what is a proficiency scale for our parents so that that can help them. What is a formative and summative assessment? What's building a body of evidence over time? Understanding my student grades, and some myths and facts sheets that will actually go out later on this week, just to help our parents and students understand what the grading process is. Both in administration and instructional coaches, we've been meeting with each PLC each week to follow up where they're at. We've been just gathering information from them on what they need, what they're hearing. I've had many meetings with parents, just having discussions with them as to what they see the strengths and weaknesses are at this time too, so I can get a greater understanding of where we are, what messages we still need to get out there. We've continued some guiding coalition conversations so that we are understanding some of the changes and some of the things that we might need to do. And then we've also continued to build some grading videos and feedback for staff so that as we move towards parent-teacher conferences, our transition from more, I'd like to talk less about why we're grading the way we are as to what the learning is that's going on with our students. And so giving them some ideas and some hints, our staff some hints as to guiding the conversations appropriately with kind of our new normal with the parent-teacher conferences. And then we have plans, obviously, for the remainder of November with parent-teacher conferences. We have that check sheet. And then we're going to do individual check-ins with our instructional coaches to make sure that everything's clear and our staff understands kind of what's going on. So that's kind of our timeline, and making sure that we're definitely trying to get information out, not only to our community, but making sure that we're listening to our staff and our students as to where they're at this point in time.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Byam, for that update. Questions, concerns from board members?
This is Pam. I would just like to say that your parent information is really comprehensive, and I would hope it would answer most questions. It was very informative. So thanks for the hard work.
Okay.
Thanks, Pam.
And questions. The one thing I do is sometimes you say ARG and sometimes you say ABG. Can you discriminate between the two, or is it the same thing?
I'm sorry, standard reference grading?
Yeah, versus standard based grading. Is there any difference between based and reference, or? Because my question is, if there isn't, I'd just like to see us have some uniformity here. If there's a difference, I'd like to understand that.
The standard reference grading is based on the essential standards. The standard based is, I can't remember there is a difference. There is a distinction. I can't remember what the base part is. Do you remember?
I just think it's going to be confusing.
No, that's a great question.
If we don't use the same terminology the entire time
Right.
for
Yeah.
I know I
our
read it.
teachers and for our students.
I know I read it in your books and material, and what you're doing is standard reference grading instead of standard base grading. So maybe by the next meeting, we can have Jill or the other Jill explain that for everybody.
Sounds good.
Okay. I mean, if we want to just use SRG, that's fine. That's fine with me. I just want to make sure that we're uniform.
I want to say it's based on it's reference to the standards so that you're adjusting the levels accordingly. I want to say it's that the base is just, it's a different way of assessing the standards. So I'll make sure to figure that out and share that with you.
Okay, thank you very much. Clarity there. Gentlemen over here, any questions?
Do you find that parents and families are understanding the concept and why we're moving in this direction, or is it still kind of a tough sell?
I don't think it's necessarily a tough sell because I think the majority of our students have had some sort of contact with standard reference grading. I would say that there still are questions. We're still learning as a staff as we're implementing things. And so you have a little bit of adjustment period understanding. I think where the confusion happens is where you have the 4, 3, 2, 1 type of grades that match with the A's and the 100% and the 90% and things like that. It's almost a modified like combination of the traditional with the standard reference grading. I think that's where the confusion lies the majority of the time. But when you go into a classroom, when you see teachers posting a proficiency scale up on a board and they're saying, can you self-assess where you're at with this standard in the 2 level? I think the depth of conversations regarding the learning that's actually taking place is impressive.
Just looking it up and trying to remember, standards reference means that the student gets taught or tested based on the standards. The skills that have been determined, the reference for the lesson. And standards based refers to the practice, making sure students learn what they are taught. Is that correct? Get Jill to talk some more. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that we are being clear.
It does get
Probably just using one term or the other. So, okay.
And I'll answer that. I think that, I think anytime you have any kind of a change in how you do business, there's always some confusion. And I think that it's realistic to expect that. And so that's why I think you're seeing the high school putting out the information they're going to continue to educate and answer questions. I think it's really important we, again, go through this process together so that just like Chris said, staff are still learning. So what better way than to bring along our parents in that learning process? So I think that it's okay that not everyone understands it, but we need to recognize that and address it. And that's what we're doing.
I get asked about this quite a bit still, and I use the same 2 examples with anybody that I talk to. And once you give them an example that they can relate to, it seems like it really clicks with people. So maybe someday when we get down the road, we could have like a Q&A or some really basic examples of how it relates to the real world, because that's really what we're trying to do is prepare students for jobs. And I think once you can explain it in that way, people really appreciate it and accept it better than, big terms and too much information sometimes is overwhelming. But if you can have a pretty specific, simple example, it seems to go over pretty well for me, at least.
I think the last 2 weeks, there's been a couple of examples in the FAQ sheet that we sent out that really kind of help. I think when you look at, I use this example, and I think a lot, we have a lot of student athletes, student activities. They can relate to this example. I think it's, when you're looking at the learning, when it like the formative versus a summative assessment, you're looking at a practice, a basketball practice, a play, those type of practices. You're not keeping stats. You might be keeping stats to better prepare yourself or prepare the coach to put them in the right place for the game. And so they over a period of time, they're working, they're working out, they're practicing, they're making free throws, they're working on their lines in a play, things like that. And then we put them into a game situation or a play or a performance. That's their summative assessment, and that's where they have to perform. And that's what we're grading on, that they are actively able to perform at a high level when the pressure's on. And so that's one of the things that we used last week. I thought that was a really good analogy.
Okay, thank you. Now, I know that when we started this, the high school was the first one to start it. I'm going to ask each of the other three principals here just in 30 seconds. Do you feel that you are 1 semester, 1 year, or 2 years behind in where you are? In other words, when will you be at this level using the SRG as your grading tool? Will be next semester, next year, or 2 years from now? I'll start with Scott. Mr. Kelly?
All right. Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I guess that's a slippery slope. I would say we're probably 2 years out, based on where we are. I think with our planning time the way it is this year and what we have established for work time and what we can roll out, we have intentions of moving forward with some of our stuff with starting to learn about proficiency scales and stuff like that this year. I think we're well on our way in the process, but I think with our restructure and changing our system to what we needed to make work this year, that puts us kind of a year behind. And so I think we'll have some teachers maybe trial it next year, maybe one per grade level that have been a little bit ahead and working towards that while we're helping share and then be prepared the following year.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Kelly. Mr. Winter?
I'll kind of answer for both of us for elementary.
Okay.
I think standards, assessing standards kind of lends itself a little bit more to elementary because we don't have to worry about grade point averages and certain number of credits like they do maybe at the high school. So we've been doing that for a while now, just based on whether it's a yes, no, whether it's 1, 2, 3, 4. We've settled now in the last couple of years of mastered, progressing, limited progress, or not assessed at this time. So we've really been doing that for a while. I think probably where we're spending our time now in our teams is working on, similar to what Scott said, proficiency scales, defining what does proficiency look like at each of those levels. And I know for speaking for my building, we're working on honing our formative and then our summative assessments to ensure that what we're assessing matches with how we've broken down a standard and what we're asking our students to do. So I think for us, the next step will be proficiency scales, goal setting for our students, writing SMART goals for our teams, those kinds of things.
And I think our staff is still working too on what, like, as I'm looking at a kindergarten student, what does proficiency look like for meeting this, this, and this? And I think that takes time as we define what that looks like. We look at more of those common formative assessments or even summatives to decide as a team what that level of rigor is. But yeah, completely aligned with what Brad said and what we're working on.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate all your assistance in working on this, all the principals. And next, we're going to go to the social and emotional learning.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. So just a moment. So I know that our board has been aware of the need of social emotional learning, but as I've started in the district, I think I want to make sure that anyone that's watching is also understanding why we're addressing the social emotional learning. And before I get into that, I just want to talk about CASEL a little bit. CASEL is something you'll hear us reference as we progress through the social emotional learning. CASEL is simply an organization that was founded in 1994 to help advance the science of social emotional learning and help establish some best practices and policies. And so CASEL is at the root of Iowa's work with regard to the social competencies. During my interview, I shared, as part of the state social emotional learning task force, and our work was rooted in CASEL. So I think that's a good that's something to be aware of, so that as you look at social emotional learning yourself, you can reference kind of the organization that leads the nation in this work. With regard to social emotional learning and how it improves student outcomes and student gains, there are many things that social emotional learning has been linked to. And so social emotional skills, I think, is self-explanatory. It's in the name. But when you think about how it can also impact positive classroom behavior, and there is research to show that there's an 11 percentile point gain on standardized achievement tests when you have a strong social emotional learning program and comprehensive program in your district. And then it also reduced the risk for failures with regard to conduct problems and emotional distress, which is what I think the board had anticipated needing to make sure we're addressing, especially in times of COVID, recognizing some of the extra challenges that bring itself to with regard to the, what we're in right now. The other piece is how social emotional learning pays off long term. So there was a research that showed students in the Seattle school district still outpace their peers 15 years after having participated in social emotional learning curriculum. They had higher attendance and graduation rates, better rates of employment and economic status, better emotional and mental health, fewer criminal record and substance problems. And then there's the cost benefit for the district as to what they invested versus the cost benefit as a result. So what is social emotional learning? Again, I know the board has received this, but for those listening, it really encompasses 5 major areas. And those are self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, and social awareness. And I think that's the biggest myth and misnomer that we're going to need to overcome, is that that's not the same thing as mental health. Social emotional competencies may help you with strategies to help with some mental health difficulties or challenges, but it's not synonymous. So the elements of social emotional learning include explicit skill instruction for students, modeling of these skills by adults, and a positive climate and culture that's established in the district. So as far as the district's role in collaborating this district initiative is, first, I think we really need to clarify and distinguish social emotional learning from mental health initiatives. Mental health first aid is something our staff has been trained in. That definitely is something we needed to do, but that's related specifically to mental health and not social emotional learning. Same thing would be true of the ACEs work that has occurred in the district. So I think we just need to be cognizant of building the foundation of social emotional learning and then understanding of those competencies. We are developing and implementing a long-term social emotional learning plan. I had shared with the board kind of the roadmap that has been set aside by AASA, which is a national superintendent organization, with regard to how to implement a district-wide social emotional learning plan. And we will be following that roadmap. We will be making sure that we're providing leadership and resources for effective implementation. We'll build and prioritize social emotional learning as a part of our core district reform. So it's part of our strategic plan, part of what we are, it's one of our goals as a board and as a district. Maintaining a district infrastructure that supports the social emotional learning, and then we will need to facilitate evaluation of our efforts so that we know what's working, why it's working. The other thing that I wanted to share with you is a peek at the state of Iowa has actually developed by grade span, and I'm just going to scroll on down to the grade spans, those 5 competency areas, and help and have identified at what grade span we should be building upon those competencies. So when we talk about self-awareness, one of the targeted areas we need to have our students be able to do is to be able to identify their emotions. And what that looks like K through 2 obviously looks very different in grades 9 through 12. So this essentially the competencies that the state of Iowa has put together with regard to this grade span will help guide the work that we're going to do as a district. So when I say that we want to build the foundation of the 5 competencies, this is what I'm talking about, is making sure that our staff are fully aware of what the competencies are and what those competencies entail. What does it mean to be self-aware? What does it mean to be able to build self-confidence? What exactly is it that our classroom teachers are going to need to be able to do, and at what depth for each of the grade spans? So again, the state of Iowa has created the grade spans and helped us with some of that competency work, but that's really the plan for us this year, is to build the foundation for the 5 competencies so that we can then build a more comprehensive plan moving forward. But I think the biggest hurdle right now is to make sure people don't make social emotional learning synonymous with mental health, because social emotional learning is necessary for every human being, every child, as well as an adult. And mental health supports aren't necessarily always needed all the time with every person, maybe more sporadically, but we need to make sure that we avoid making those terms synonymous with one another.
Okay, thank you very much for that presentation. And I'll open the floor to questions from board members.
I was wondering, if a district wants to implement a PLC model, it seems like there's a lot of resources and programs available to do that. Is there something similar for SEL, or is it more of like a build your own kind of plan?
There are some research-based supports that the district actually already has in pockets that I would see us implementing systemically. Second step would be one example of that. That's something that the district has already adopted, maybe not as widely as we would as a district, but that's got some research behind it. I would say there's maybe more resources, distinct resources for the PLCs, which is why the state committee got together to even come up with that grade span piece for the social competencies, because there's so much out there and everyone puts the SEL label on their product. And so really what practitioners were wanting was kind of a roadmap to help them go that direction. And so that's why the state of Iowa came up with the grade span piece, as well as really directing everyone to CASEL. CASEL's the resource that we'll utilize the most.
And Jeremy, I would add to that you mentioned the PLC process, and that structure of collaborative teams is really the same structure. I mean, we've used that to attack academics, but this is the same thing that we would use for social emotional learning. So those documents that Julie referenced that kind of lay out those competencies at each grade level. I don't think any teacher in the district would look at those and say that they don't teach that or those things are foreign to them, but it's about that consistency universally. And so when those teachers collaborate in teams and they talk about at second grade what everybody is consistently teaching and how we're going to teach that and ensure that our kids have those skills, that's where those rich conversations will come in. And then you go looking for the strategies to do those things better. So I think some of that is that foundational work of digging in and unpacking that we've done with standards that are academic standards, that now we need to take that same approach that we're familiar with and is working well for us on that realm into the SEL arena and do some of that same work.
I appreciate that. Thanks. It's just with the PLC, one of the things I think the district did really well was when we decided it was a priority, we jumped in with 2 feet and we made sure that the teachers had the support and the training that they needed. New staff were brought up to speed pretty quickly. And it seems like the supports that were available with the PLC model helped us accomplish that. I'd like to see us use that same tenacity, you know, the same the same effort into the SEL model, and I'm hoping that we have the supports and the models and the resources that we can basically do what we did with PLC for social emotional.
So I
Julie.
think one of the components of doing the social emotional learning for staff is we have to be cognizant of their own social emotional learning and provide it for the adults. And so the challenge that we have ahead of us, everything that we're talking about tonight, quite frankly, are really big rocks. They're things that some districts will tackle one in a year, and if we're trying to tackle all three, so we're trying to be very strategic in how we implement this, so it doesn't feel like just you want to. I mean, it's already difficult. We're trying to do this in a manner that's going to be bite-sized, chewable pieces versus too much all at once. So just know that that's part of why it may feel a little different, is we're just trying to be cognizant of our teaching staff and what they already have on their plate.
Julie, can you share that presentation, those slides, so we could read them?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
Because I'd like
Especially
to read
what,
all of them.
especially look at the ones from the state.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions from board members? Okay, hearing no other questions on that subject, we're going to move on to portraits of a graduate. Julie, once again.
Okay, so I really debated what I should share tonight, and I think I landed on being able to share the presentation I'm starting with for our community members and stakeholders that have never heard of Portrait of a Graduate before. And so I'm going to just kind of walk you through the presentation that I've done for a couple of groups thus far. And so essentially what we talk about, these are the learning outcomes that we discussed prior to the presentation, that we're trying to make sure we gain some insight into what it means to be future ready and why that is important, and understanding that the state of Iowa, how they've defined college, career, and life readiness, and why we feel it's important for Boone to develop a portrait of a graduate for the district. And when I refer to Boone, I try to emphasize that this is really a community-driven effort, not a school-driven effort, that every community has unique needs that they want to make sure are part of what we provide our students with prior to graduation, so that they're college and career ready. So we start off, and we aren't going to do this actual activity, but what I do is I start off with the groups and ask them to picture themselves graduating high school, and to think about ways that they felt prepared for life after high school. And most of the groups thus far have spoken about if they were fortunate enough to participate in certain classes, they felt they were more prepared for college. Or some individuals talked about how their parents really were the reason they felt prepared in certain ways, and how they wish they would have had more of it in school. Some comparisons between what they went to school with and what their children are getting in high school now, that they wish that would have been present when they were in school. So we kind of brainstorm the things that help them prepare for life after high school, and then we move to ways that they were not prepared for life after high school, and why we feel that that is, and what we think we can do to help make sure that that is not the case for our students that are going through our system now, that we certainly want them to feel prepared regardless of whatever path they take. So then I share this video, and I am going to go ahead and share this. I don't know, will the sound come through right? I'm hoping. Anyway, it's mostly reading, so you have to read quickly. So I'm going to warn you. The music that's with it isn't necessary. So I'm going to go ahead and play this video so that you can see what everyone else sees as to, whoop, maybe I'm not. What do I have to do? Nope, didn't work. Try which one? Oh, you got it. Thanks. So then what we discuss is how to, at first, what surprised them about the video. Are they surprised by the fact that 46% of teachers think students need technology, but 94% of the students use technology? I think that most people say, well, yeah, because the kids use Google to try and get some of the answers to the questions. And so we talk about some of the things that they saw in the video, and then we go into how it's important for us to prepare for the unpredictable future. And what surprises a lot of people is this is from 2019. I really think it's gone up to 15 in 2020, but what I could find on paper was 12, the average number of jobs in a lifetime for individuals from the 2019 Bureau of Labor Statistics survey, and that the typical tenure was 3 to 5 years. And I think that's something sometimes surprises people too. So it's really important that we provide our students with the necessary skills to be able to take whatever path and to be able to change paths as they go through. Then I also share some job skills for the future that are changing rapidly from 2015 to 2030. And you can see that the boxes that are in red, how complex problem solving kind of moves down on the top 10 and judgment and decision making moves up. And so we have conversations around why people think that is. Why are some of the things that are in those lists no longer in existence in the top 10 and the other lists? Lots of rich discussion around why that might be and how that affects what we need to be providing to our students as they go through our system in Boone. Then I also share a 2017 document that shows unemployment rates and earnings by educational attainment, and how someone who does not graduate with a high school diploma is at risk of a higher unemployment rate, and lower median usual weekly earnings compared to those that have at least some postgraduate work that they do past high school, and what that means for them, both financially and employment-wise. And then we discuss that the governor has the Future Ready Iowa initiative is actually based on research out of Georgetown University that stated 68% of the jobs in Iowa by 2025 are going to require education and training beyond high school. And so that's really where the governor got the 70% of Iowa's workforce will have a post-secondary education goal that she has for the state of Iowa, and kind of currently where we are, that 58.4% of adults 25 and older have completed education or training beyond high school, and our goal is to try and to get to that 70% by the time we hit 2025, which is quickly approaching. And then we talk about the definition of college and career readiness in the state of Iowa, and just kind of walk through the typical assessments that we've used to determine whether we've achieved those particular areas. Content knowledge is the most common one that people are most familiar with, because most people, if you grew up in the state, you're familiar with Iowa assessments, the old ITBS, you're familiar with some of the assessments that were listed. But as we work through some of the other pieces, this is where I point out that Boone is kind of ahead of the game with regard to EDGE, and having provided some experiential learning and internship or apprenticeships with our students, and really that work-based learning that's really crucial to helping our students be able to kind of have their own personalized pathway and be able to prepare for career and life changes successfully. And just even having to apply financial aid is a transition skill in and of itself. The third one being able to develop key learning skills and cognitive strategies. And we talk about the different ways that those are kind of their success indicators. If students can do those items, perform those items, then we know that we've achieved that piece. It's really about making sure that the student learning leads to that experiential learning, that they're able to take the information that they're gaining in school and then apply it to a variety of settings. And then lastly, this is where our social emotional learning comes in. This is building a strong foundation of self-understanding and engagement strategies, really is what social emotional learning is all about, and about the different mindsets and behaviors that are necessary for success. I share another document. This is another way of looking at what I just went through with those 4 categories. Sometimes looking at things in a different way clicks for some, so I just put it in a different format. And then answering the question as to why Portrait of a Graduate for Boone. And really, it's just an expansion of our current district promises. We already have the daily promises of valuing the uniqueness of all and giving a fresh start each day and partnering with families and developing positive character and ensuring learning. But really, it's our promise to students, parents, and the community to ensure that students graduate from Boone college, career, and life ready. And so I talk a little bit more about how this is really about providing a strategic direction for the students that go through our system. And again, community community developed, not just school developed. So that's when I talk about what the portrait design team needs to look like. And this is something that we'll be developing hopefully when we hit about February. Is kind of the target date of trying to develop a design team and making sure that we have all of those stakeholders represented that are in this diagram. I think sometimes we're really good about getting parents, students, and teachers, but not so great about getting our community members and social service agencies and higher education and business leaders and even our different communities of faith involved in this process, because all of these stakeholders make up our community, and our students are hopefully going to be active participants in our community, and we want to make sure that they are helping us to design this portrait. And then I share the portrait design process and how we will plan. This is kind of where we are right now as the engagement process. We're hoping to activate the design team in February so that we can create that visual and narrative story, so that then we can bring this to the board for an official adoption of the plan, and then we'll start the implementation process. And you always want to measure your progress every year, but it's an ongoing process that hopefully, again, is as nimble and flexible as what we're hoping to ensure our students can do. So then I give some examples of Portrait of a Graduate graphics so that people kind of have an idea of what we're going to be developing. We're going to be developing a visual of what it is that we in Boone feel is necessary that our students have to be college, career, and life ready. And the top 2 graphics are from Iowa. The bottom 3 are from around the nation. So just different pictorials of representing what that community felt best represented what they hoped to have their students be able to achieve. And then again, going through kind of the assessment side of areas, if we're successful, these are kind of success indicators of how we'll know that our students are college, career, and life ready, is if they can kind of check off these items. And this again comes from redefining ready. We've talked about this. This is just put into a different format than what I've shared previously. Same information, different format. But these are just indicators of students who go into a career and are successful, kind of what's necessary, those that choose to go into college, kind of what those success indicators have been historically. And again, it's not as simple as saying, if someone doesn't achieve one of these benchmarks, they aren't going to be successful. It just increases their likelihood of success. And that's what we're trying to do, is ensure that each student that goes through our system can be able to say that they are college, career, and life ready. And so then we go through questions, and that's kind of where we are now with all of you. So I'm going to get out of this.
Thank you, Julie, for that presentation. I would just say that this morning I was doing some paperwork. I was listening on the radio, and there was a gentleman from Stanley Black & Decker, large equipment maker, and they're working on a national program very similar to sound like a little bit of our EDGE program, because they feel they're in factories, in construction, the new employees need to be very computer literate and willing to adopt and think out of the bubble some and be prepared because they're going to be running much more advanced equipment, artificial intelligence that they need to be working with. And these are people in the electrical work, construction work, HVAC work. And so that fits in here very well as to what we're talking about with Portrait of Graduate, because not everyone needs the college education. And I think sometimes we spend too much time trying to push everyone to college when in reality it's probably not necessarily the best, and oftentimes they're very good paying jobs, very rewarding careers. They can make more than some of the college graduates. You know, I look at what we pay our average teacher, and then I look at what one of my board members pays some of his workers have been around for a few years, and they're getting paid more.
I think I'd prefer to call it post-secondary education, and that way you're not just saying college and non-college.
Right.
Community college, college, and trade schools, college, etc. So post-secondary education, which covers all the gamuts, I think, is better terminology to use.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I think the governor selected post-secondary as well for that, the goal that she set for the state as well.
Out of curiosity, do we know where does Boone fall on post-secondary as a percentage?
Jill, do you know off
We
the top
have
of your
a,
head? Go ahead.
We went to NIPSE last year, which was the National Post-Secondary Institute, and I want to say our number was in the mid-60s, I think.
Yeah, we were in the mid 60s. We kind of have a data void right now. Last year's the lack of data is not helpful. And with that transition to a new state test, some of those readiness benchmarks come from that. Some of those come from giving the ACT test. And typically we would give that to all of our juniors and we'd have that data, but our juniors didn't take that last spring. They took it this fall as seniors, and we still are waiting for that data to come back. So we have a bit of a data void that would lead into all those numbers. But the last number that we had, we were in the mid 60s.
Yeah, and one of our goals as a school last year was to raise that average for high school. I want to say it was 68%, and we were trying to raise it to, I want to say it was like 70, 72, somewhere in there, just for that first step. We were trying to gather some growth based on the things that we were trying to accomplish as a school.
So the reason I ask is it might be beneficial knowing that statistic to help with the foundation of this Portrait of a Graduate, kind of putting a plan in place.
Agreed. And I think as we progress through this, some of those district specific pieces will be part of that conversation as we go through the process. This presentation that I shared really is meant to be a complete overview and not necessarily some of the work itself that we'll do, but rather just an awareness phase for those that haven't even heard of Portrait of a Graduate. But I would agree that, I would prefer to be able to share kind of baseline data across the board with regard to where we currently are as we go through this process, so that we know where we are currently and we know where we're headed.
Okay, thank you. Other questions from board members? Okay, hearing no other questions, is there anything else that we need to discuss in our work session tonight? Okay, then I'll entertain a motion to adjourn tonight. Anyone want to go home?
This is Pat, so moved.
Second.
Thank you. Moved and seconded to adjourn the meeting. All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed. Thanks everyone for your work tonight, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Great.
Have a nice evening.
Everybody take